The glamour of Hollywood has attracted aspiring actors and filmmakers from around the world for a century. There is no other place on the planet quite like it. A town full of wildly ambitious people who have followed their dreams of succeeding in the cutthroat entertainment industry. Of course, only a very small select few land roles in movies people actually watch, let alone walk red carpets or become household names. For everyone else, it's hustling for auditions while working part-time jobs, taking every small uncredited role, doing almost anything to make it. Zach Horwitz was one of those people. He moved to Hollywood with no connections and no qualifications, but ended up acting alongside Hollywood legends, bought a multi-million-dollar house, and drove flashy cars. He had ostensibly made it. But this is not some Hollywood fairy tale. Zach Horwitz went to the extreme to make his dreams come true, and along the way, stole millions from his closest family and friends. In 2011, Zach Horwitz and his girlfriend Mallory Hagedorn had just graduated from Indiana University. Zach had a dream of opening up a juice bar, and he convinced Mallory to move to Chicago with him so they could open up Fuel, a health-focused juice and smoothie bar. Zach even asked some of his friends back home to move to Chicago to help run the business. While in Chicago, Zach started performing in the local theater and comedy shows and was falling in love with his new hobby. Old Yelp reviews for Fuel stated that the shop was often closed when it was supposed to be open, possibly indicating where Zach's priorities lay. Less than a year after opening Fuel, Zach showed Mallory an email he received from Howard Schultz, the billionaire founder of Starbucks. Howard Schultz was apparently impressed with Zach's entrepreneurial skills and wanted Zach to work for his venture capital firm, Mavron. Schultz offered Zach a job in LA where he would lead Mavron's entrepreneur outreach program. Zach and Mallory agreed that the offer was too good to turn down, so the couple packed their bags, abandoned Fuel, abandoned Chicago, and moved to LA. By mid-2012, Zach and Mallory were settled into their new lives in LA. Zach was busy working at Mavron, and Mallory was pursuing a career as a hairstylist. It seemed like Zach was an integral part of Mavron. He was constantly receiving emails and texts from Howard Schultz and rushing off to meetings. The couple became so close with the billionaire that Howard sometimes even emailed Mallory directly. However, Mallory was beginning to notice the toll that the demanding job was taking on Zach. He was drinking more heavily than usual to deal with the stress, and had also started taking Adderall and Xanax every day. What Mallory didn't know was the real reason why Zach was so stressed out. Zach wasn't working at the Mavron offices. In fact, he had never once spoken to his supposed mentor Howard Schultz. The job and subsequent communications from Howard Schultz were all fake. Zach would write and schedule emails with official-looking Mavron signatures to be sent to himself and sometimes Mallory. Zach devised the elaborate scheme so the couple would move to LA and Zach could follow his dreams of becoming a movie star.
Your son was my best friend. He was my brother. And he was one hell of a soldier. Everything he did, work, school, friendship, he did it 110%.
That clip was from one of Zach's earliest reels. You don't exactly need to be a film critic to see that he didn't possess natural acting talent. It was around this time he also adopted the stage name Zach Avery. Making it in Hollywood is all about networking and who you know. Zach didn't have much of a launch pad in showbiz, but he eventually schmoozed his way into dinner with two filmmaker brothers, Julio and Diego Halaviz. The Halaviz brothers were also in their 20s and starting out in Hollywood. They were creative and ambitious and had already made a few short films together, but they struggled with getting funding for bigger projects. Zach knew this meeting was a rare opportunity, and he needed to find a way to make himself valuable to the Halaviz brothers. He told Julio and Diego about his business connections with Starbucks founder Howard Schultz. Julio and Diego were impressed. The three of them decided to start up their own production company, 1in which stood for 1 in a million. We created 1in Productions to produce high-concept genre films with an edgy and unique approach to storytelling, the Halaviz brothers said in a statement to Deadline. Between 2012 and 2016, 1MM reportedly produced 2 to 3 low-budget horror and sci-fi films per year. They even produced and distributed a film directed by Rob Zombie, who was known for his Halloween remakes. Meanwhile, Zach was still working on his acting career. He had a couple of small roles in low-budget Hallevis Brothers films, appeared in a few short films, and was also an uncredited extra in the 2014 Brad Pitt film Fury. In 2013, 1MM announced a partnership with Miami-based distribution company Alebrije Entertainment, which was co-owned by Gustavo Montadon. Gustavo was the real deal. He served almost 30 years at 20th Century Fox and was the vice president of TV distribution in Latin America. Their business plan was to acquire cheap English language films, then sell the distribution rights in Spanish-speaking countries via theatrical and other release platforms, including Netflix and HBO. Zach's efforts were slowly paying off, but his desire for fame and fortune led him to accelerate things. Before we get into the rest of Zach's story, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like if you're enjoying it. Zach was still very close with his college friends, Jacob Wonderland, Joseph Dialteris, and Matthew Swinger. While Zach was in LA, his friends were working entry-level jobs at 2 of the largest investment banking firms in the world, JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley. In 2014, Zach pitched his friend Jacob an investment opportunity. He had a movie that would make a guaranteed 30 to 40% return within the quarter. Zach talked up 1MM, his existing deals with HBO and Netflix, his connections with Howard Schultz, and eventually, Jacob agreed to lend $37,000. Zach kept his word and repaid the loan with interest on time. Zach's other friends, Joseph and Matthew, were now interested in 1MM. Although they had careers in investment banking, Zach's friends didn't know much about the movie business. Zach told them about how he needed money to acquire the rights to low-budget English language movies, then he would sell those rights to HBO, Netflix, and Sony for Latin American distribution. Again, Zach told them it was a sure thing and even showed them a 20-page license agreement signed by a Netflix executive. It was actually completely fake. These were Zach's closest friends. They attended each other's weddings and trusted Zach. Jacob, Joseph, and Matthew got their family, friends, and associates to join them in lending $1 million to 1MM to buy the rights to 7 movies supposedly licensed to HBO and Sony. These loans were all promptly repaid. In October 2014, Zach and Mallory tied the knot at the Four Seasons Hotel in Beverly Hills. It was a lavish wedding ceremony. Zach now had a taste for the high life. To keep the money flowing, Zach would solicit new investors, talking up his business connections at Mavron, HBO, and Netflix, and guarantee huge profits. Zach would secure new investors and use their money to pay back existing loans. In short, Zach was running a Ponzi scheme. In mid-2015, Zach sent his college buddies an annual report touting 1MM had acquired and distributed 49 films, quote, without incurring a single loss in the process. Jacob, Joseph, Matthew, and another banker friend, Tyler Crookston, decided to seize this opportunity and founded JJMT Capital in Chicago. Jacob and Joseph quit their jobs to focus on finding more investors for 1MM, promising them the same improbable returns that Zach had been promising. Over the next 5 years, JJMT Capital would funnel $490 million in loans to Zach. The money came from a wide downline of business associates, as well as dozens of friends and family members. Many of these investors were just ordinary people with little to no experience in investing, who were drawn in by the allure of making guaranteed returns in the glamorous film industry. Some of these friends and family members had trusted Zach and JJMT with their life savings. Over the years, Zach made steady repayments to all his friends at JJMT. He also lived a very extravagant life. He bought a $6 million Beverlywood home with a screening room, gym, and a 1,000-bottle wine cellar. He then spent $2.5 million on a celebrity interior designer. He traveled in private jets and would spend $124,000 on Vegas trips. He had a luxury watch subscription, sat courtside at Lakers games, and once tried to tip a waitress $5,000.
he spent over $600,000 on cars. He was essentially skimming a huge portion of investor money to fund his opulent lifestyle, projecting an image of success, attracting more investors, and bankroll movies to star in. In August 2016, the Horwitz brothers released a short film titled The Laughing Man, a fan film about the comic book villain Joker. Zach plays the leading role in this origin story film. To date, it has over 6 million views on YouTube. The comments are full of praise, with some fans calling it better than some major studio films. This was a pivotal moment for Zach and the Horwitz brothers. Millions of people had seen and loved their work, and Zach would go on to even more extreme lengths to chase that high. In March 2017, Romick Yagnazari was telling his friend, tennis partner, and business partner, Jim Russell, about a lucrative investment opportunity they needed to get in on. Romick and Jim were both from Las Vegas and had made a few investments together in the past. Romick was a mortgage broker, and Jim was an executive at a steel company. Romick was referred to Zach Horwitz through a mutual friend who was already an investor and was eager for a slice of the pie. Jim decided to meet up with Zach in person and hear the pitch for himself. They met at a bar at the Four Seasons Hotel in Beverly Hills, the same place where Zach had gotten married. Zach charmed Jim and explained how he would use Jim's money to buy the rights to cheap movies, then sell them onto HBO for distribution in Latin America. He'd pay Jim back in 6 months with a 15% profit. Jim was an experienced businessman and felt this seemed too good to be true. What would happen if HBO declined the rights to buy a film, he asked. HBO has never backed out, Zach replied. Jim went back to his business partner Romick and expressed his skepticism. But Romick assured Jim that he had seen the contracts with HBO, plus he had friends who were making money. Jim wanted to see the details of 1NMM's financials, but Zach had refused. Romick believed that Zach's refusal to send financials was proof that 1NMM was not desperately in need of money. Romick showed Jim the emails he'd been sending directly with HBO. This seemed to ease Jim's concerns a bit. Jim replied, "I'm still bewildered as to why he just doesn't send the financials. It is so much easier than all this crap. Red flag." Over the next 2 years, Jim and his partners would wire $80 million in loans to Zach Horwitz. The emails from HBO were all forged by Zach. In August 2017, Deadline reported that 1NMM had raised $5 million to produce and finance sci-fi and horror films. The strange thing about the article was that Zach was mentioned as both Zach Horwitz and Zach Avery, as if they were two different people. In September 2017, Zach and Mallory welcomed their first child, Jackson. It is unclear how much Mallory knew about 1NMM or if she was ever told the truth about Mavron, but Zach had built their entire life together, now with a newborn, on lies, and now a Ponzi scheme. In 2017, Zach had a supporting role in the Diego Horwitz-directed time travel thriller, Curvature. It stars Lindsay Fonseca, who had recurring roles in several prominent TV shows and featured a cameo from Linda Hamilton. The film was released widely enough to receive a couple of reviews, but the consensus was that it was generic and slightly incoherent. In 2018, Zach landed supporting roles in a few more films, including The White Crow, which was directed by Ralph Fiennes, and Farming, alongside Kate Beckinsale. He also began shooting the neo-noir thriller Last Moment of Clarity. It was Zach's first leading role in a feature-length film. He played a man on the run from the mob, who then begins to suspect his murdered girlfriend is still alive. His co-stars included Samara Weaving and Brian Cox. A review from The Guardian read, "The directors and/or actor Zach Avery must be either very well financed or ridiculously persuasive, because they've managed to pull together a supporting cast and budget for this debut thriller that far exceeds what the script seems to warrant." Zach was finally brushing shoulders with well-known actors and getting attention from mainstream audiences. His dream of Hollywood stardom was feeling more and more achievable, even if he was stealing money to make it happen. Interestingly, in interviews he gives around this time, he never mentions 1NMM or the movie licensing deals. It is almost as if he has separated the two Zachs, just like in the Deadline article just a few years ago. Zach Horwitz, the businessman and Ponzi scheme mastermind, and Zach Avery, the up-and-coming actor.
So how I kind of got through the financial side of doing it is basically doing anything you possibly can to get the dollar, to pay the rent, to keep going to the things you want to go to. You wait tables or you do whatever it is now. And so that's really what I did in the beginning.
But in November 2019, Zach had abruptly stopped paying back his investors. By now, he had been running his Ponzi scheme for 5 years without issues, as he had always repaid his loans with interest on time. He had collected a total of $690 million before everything came crashing down. Now that the payments seemed to have stopped, Zach's friends at JJMT were becoming increasingly concerned. Jim Russell texted wanting to know what was going on. He knew something was wrong and soon got his lawyers involved. Zach tried to keep investors at bay by insisting that Netflix and HBO were the ones who were late in making payments. He claimed that many HBO vendors, not just 1MM, were having trouble getting paid. He urged his investors not to contact Netflix or HBO directly. The investors in Chicago were starting to lose patience as well. Zach pulled out one of his original tricks. He impersonated Netflix executives, wrote and scheduled an email to himself, and composed a lengthy back and forth regarding the late payments. He showed these forged emails to his investors to prove the issue was not on his end. March 2020 was a time of fear and uncertainty for a lot of people around the world due to COVID-19. This was the case for Mallory Horwitz, but she was also juggling her second pregnancy and was trying to sell their house quickly as the family was in some financial trouble. At some point, Zach had persuaded Mallory to quit her job as a celebrity hairstylist so she could focus on raising their children. Mallory relied on Zach's income and did not have her own money. Marty Kaplan, a Chicago investor who was friends with Zach's college buddy Joseph D'Alteris, was the first investor to sue. Both Marty and Joseph stood to lose almost all of their family's money. The Kaplan family's lawyer subpoenaed Netflix in December 2020 for records on its payments to 1MM for distribution rights of 20 films. Netflix responded claiming to have no record of doing business with 1MM. The Kaplan's lawyer urged for a more thorough search to be conducted and attached a license agreement between Netflix and 1MM, then also forwarded the email chain between Zach Horwitz and a Netflix executive. The fraudulent contracts and emails sounded alarms at Netflix. A real lawyer from Netflix wrote back demanding to know where all the documentation had come from. Zach's investors were beginning to piece together what was going on. A few weeks later, Netflix sent a cease and desist letter to Zach. The US Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, was notified about what appeared to be a Ponzi scheme. The SEC obtained a warrant to search through Zach's personal financial records and those of 1MM. We don't know how Zach was feeling on the inside, but he seemed undeterred on the outside. It was March 2021. Zach's 3 original victims, Jacob Wunderlin, Joseph D'Alteris, and Matthew Swinger, reported him to the FBI. Zach emailed his friends in annoyance, saying that he was complying, but the accusations were causing, quote, massive issues for 1MM and myself personally. On April 6, 2021, the FBI raided the Horwitz's $6 million Beverlywood home. Zach Horwitz, now aged 34, was arrested for securities, mail and wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. Mallory filed for a divorce on the same day. Julio and Diego Halavis have denied participating in the Ponzi scheme. Gustavo Montadon, the former 20th Century Fox VP, claims he met Zach a long time ago, but he never had a relationship with him. The FBI has not accused anyone else of wrongdoing. The SEC seized Zach's assets. He had just over $3,000 in his personal bank account. The 1MM accounts were all almost empty. Zach was released on $1 million bond. On February 14, 2022, Zach was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. He was ordered to pay over $230 million in restitution, but the judge acknowledged it was unlikely he would ever get paid. He had scammed over 250 investors, including some of his closest friends and their families. At the sentencing, victims spoke about how multiple generations of families lost all their money. Some have had to file for bankruptcy and now survive on food stamps and unemployment. Zach sobbed and pleaded with the judge to be allowed to see his toddler sons grow up. He is currently serving his sentence at the Federal Correction Institute, Terminal Island, which is a low-security prison in Los Angeles. His two sons will both be in their 20s by the time he is released.